On the darkest night of January 2023, deep inside Alaska's Denali wilderness, a baby moose collapsed alone in the snow, 3 months old, shaking, too weak to stand. His herd had vanished into the whiteout 6 hours ago. The worst blizzard in 20 years had swallowed everything. Every shadow could be a predator. Every sound could be the last thing he ever heard. But what found him that night was not a predator. It was a white Arctic wolf, a mother who had buried 2 of her own pups just 9 days earlier. And instead of killing this helpless calf, she did something that would shatter everything wildlife experts believed about predators and prey. She lay down beside him. She kept him warm. She chose him. This is not a fairy tale. This is what happened. If you believe in the incredible bonds between humans and wild animals, subscribe to Arctic Wolf Legends. Every subscription helps us share more of these remarkable tales. Now, let's begin. The radio crackled with static before Ethan Mercer could make out the words. Another herd had scattered, another group of animals driven off their winter range by a storm system that had been hammering Denali for 11 straight days. Ethan pressed the receiver closer to his ear, standing inside the cramped warmth of the Toklat River Ranger Station, his breath still visible even indoors. "Copy that," he said. "Which herd?" "The sanctuary group, 14 head. Matriarch's an old cow the researchers tagged years ago. They call her Sage. Whole herd bolted northeast toward the Teklanika drainage. Aerial couldn't track them past the river fork. Visibility's 0 up there." Ethan set the radio down. He already knew what the next question would be before anyone asked it. "Any calves unaccounted for?" Silence on the other end. Then, "At least one. Young bull calf, maybe 3 months. His mother's a cow named Birch. She was spotted with the main group, but no calf beside her." Ethan closed his eyes. A 3-month-old moose calf alone in this. Temperatures had dropped past 40 below 3 nights running. Wind chill made it worse. A calf that age couldn't regulate body heat the way adults could. Without his mother's warmth, without the herd's protection, the math was brutal and simple. Hours. Maybe less. He pulled on his outer shell, zipped it to his chin, and stepped into the storm. Ethan Mercer was 42 years old and had spent 15 of those years as a senior wildlife ranger in Denali National Park. He knew this land the way a surgeon knows the body. Every ridge, every drainage, every game trail that threaded through the spruce forests and opened onto the vast tundra flats. He had tracked wolves in whiteout conditions, tranquilized grizzlies that wandered too close to the park road, and airlifted injured caribou out of ravines so steep that the helicopter pilot had refused to hover for more than 90 seconds. But this winter was different. This winter was breaking records and breaking animals. The storm system had stalled over interior Alaska in early January and simply refused to move. Day after day, snow piled on snow. Temperatures that normally hovered around 20 below plunged past 40. The rivers froze deeper than anyone could remember. And the wildlife, moose, caribou, wolves, everything that called Denali home, had been forced into desperate choices. Herds abandoned traditional wintering grounds. Packs split apart, searching for prey that had scattered in every direction. The delicate balance that kept the ecosystem functioning had been thrown into chaos. Ethan had seen hard winters before. He had never seen one like this. He moved through the snow on foot, his headlamp cutting a narrow tunnel through the falling white. The wind hit him sideways, sharp enough to sting exposed skin in seconds. Somewhere out there, a baby moose was experiencing this alone. The sanctuary moose herd had used the same wintering area for as long as anyone had, documented them. Sage, the old matriarch, knew every sheltered draw and south-facing slope where browse was accessible even under deep snow. She had led her family through bad winters before, with the quiet confidence that comes from decades of survival. But this storm had overwhelmed even her experience. Reports from other rangers painted the picture. The herd had been feeding in a willow flat near the Sanctuary River when the wind shifted violently, bringing a wall of snow so thick that visibility dropped to 0 in seconds. Sage had turned the herd northeast, pushing toward the Teklanika drainage, where dense spruce forest might offer shelter. The adults had followed. The yearlings had kept pace. But Timber, 3 months old, legs still too short for the snow depth, body still too small to push through drifts that reached his chest, had fallen behind. His mother Birch, caught in the panic of 14 animals moving as one through a whiteout, had not realized her calf was no longer beside her, until the herd had covered nearly a mile. By then, the storm had erased every track, every scent, every trace of the direction her baby had gone. Ethan found the spot where the herd had scattered. He could read it in the snow, the churned-up willows, the deep post holes where heavy animals had plunged through the crust, the wide area of trampled ground that told the story of sudden movement. He swept his headlamp in a slow arc, looking for smaller tracks leading in a different direction. There, a single line of shallow prints, already half filled with new snow, heading south instead of northeast, away from the herd, away from safety. He followed them. The tracks told a story that tightened his chest. The stride length started normal for a calf, short, steady, purposeful. The little animal had been walking with direction at first, probably following what he thought was his mother's scent before the wind scrambled everything. Then the stride shortened. The prints wandered left, then right. A place where the calf had stopped and turned in a complete circle, confused. Further on, the gaps between prints grew irregular, stumbling. One spot where the snow was compressed in a body-shaped depression. The calf had fallen and lay there before getting up again. The prints after that were barely prints at all, dragging, weak. Ethan moved faster. But what Ethan didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that he was not the only one tracking this lost calf through the storm. And the other tracker was far closer. About 4 miles southwest of where Ethan followed those fading prints, a pure white Arctic wolf stood motionless on a ridge above the Teklanika River, her nose lifted into the screaming wind. Her name, given by the research team that had been studying her pack for 3 years, was Siku. It meant ice in Inupiaq, and it fit her perfectly, not because she was cold, but because she was elemental, part of this frozen world in a way that nothing else was. 5 years old, 90 pounds of muscle and intelligence, her coat so white that she disappeared against the snow when she stood still. Only her eyes gave her away. Amber, bright, alive with something that went deeper than animal instinct. Siku was the alpha female of a pack that the researchers had designated the Teklanika pack, 7 wolves that had held territory along the river drainage for the past 4 years. She was their leader in every way that mattered. She chose the denning sites. She decided when they hunted and when they rested. The other wolves followed her, not because she was the largest or the most aggressive, but because her judgment had kept them alive through winters that had killed other packs. But this January had wounded Siku in a way that no blizzard ever could. 9 days ago, she had given birth to 4 pups in a den she had dug beneath a fallen spruce on the riverbank. The birth had been hard. The cold had been merciless. 1 pup, the smallest, a female, had never taken her first breath. Siku had licked her for 20 minutes before accepting what the cold had already decided. Of the 3 remaining, a male had weakened over the following days. Despite Siku's constant warmth, despite her refusal to leave the den, even to eat, the pup had faded. She had carried his still body out of the den on the 5th morning and placed him gently in the snow. 2 pups survived. Koda, a bold, restless male who seemed determined to explore every corner of the den from the moment his eyes opened, and Mika, a cautious, watchful female who studied the world with the same quiet intensity her mother possessed. But the loss of her other pups had changed something in Siku. The researchers had noted it in their observations. She was more protective than any alpha female they had documented. She groomed Koda and Mika obsessively. She refused to let other pack members near the den for the first week, snarling even at her own mate when he approached. And at night, when the surviving pups slept pressed against her belly, Siku would sometimes lift her head and release a howl so long and low that the researchers recording it said it sounded less like communication and more like grief given voice. Something in her had broken open. The maternal instinct that all wolf mothers carry had been amplified by loss into something fierce and bottomless, a need to protect, to nurture, to keep alive whatever small creature depended on her. And now, standing on that ridge with the blizzard tearing at her white fur, Siku caught a scent on the wind that made every muscle in her body go still. It was not the scent of prey, exactly. It was something else. Something small, something frightened, something alone, something young. But what happened next would challenge everything the scientific community thought they understood about predator behavior, maternal instinct, and the boundaries between species. Because the scent Siku was following did not belong to a wolf pup. It belonged to a 3-month-old moose calf named Timber, lying in the snow half a mile away, too weak to stand, too cold to call for help, with barely enough warmth left in his small body to keep his heart beating for another hour. And the white wolf was already moving toward him. Siku moved down the ridge with the fluid silence that only a wolf in her prime could manage. Each paw landed precisely where the snow was firmest. No wasted motion, no sound. The wind pushed against her from the left, carrying that scent, warm, animal, distressed, directly into her nostrils with every breath. She had hunted moose before. Every wolf in Denali had. Moose were the backbone of survival in this part of Alaska, the largest prey available, dangerous and powerful, even when brought down by a full pack working in coordinated precision. An adult cow could kill a wolf with a single kick. Even yearlings fought back with a ferocity that demanded respect. But what Siku smelled on the wind tonight was none of those things. This scent carried no aggression, no strength, no fight. It carried something else entirely, a chemical signature that bypassed every predatory circuit in her brain and struck something deeper. Fear, exhaustion, youth. The scent of something very small and very close to dying. Siku reached the bottom of the ridge and crossed the frozen creek bed without breaking stride. The blizzard had eased slightly, not stopping, but thinning enough that shapes became visible at 20 yards instead of 5. She moved through a stand of spruce trees, their branches bent low under the weight of fresh snow, and emerged into a small clearing on the far side. And there he was. Timber lay on his side in a shallow depression where the wind had scooped out the snow against a fallen log. His long legs were folded beneath him, his body curled as tight as a 3-month-old moose calf could manage. His brown fur was crusted with ice. His eyes were half closed. His breathing was shallow and rapid, the kind of breathing that meant his body was losing the fight against the cold. He was still alive, barely. Siku stopped at the edge of the clearing, 15 feet away, close enough to see the frost forming on his muzzle, close enough to hear each thin, rattling breath. And something shifted. Not in the world, not in the storm, inside her. Something shifted inside this white wolf that no researcher would ever fully explain, no matter how many papers they published or how many hours of footage they reviewed. It happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. A decision made not by instinct alone, not by logic, not by anything that fit neatly into the categories that science had built to understand animal behavior. She saw a baby. Not prey, a baby, dying alone in the cold, the way her own pups had died. Siku took one step forward, then another. Her body language changed in a way that Ethan Mercer would later describe as the most extraordinary thing he had witnessed in 15 years of working with wolves. The predatory tension drained from her shoulders. Her tail, which had been held in the neutral position of a hunting wolf, dropped to a low, gentle carry. Her ears rotated forward, not with the sharp focus of a predator locking onto a target, but with the soft attention of a mother approaching something fragile. Timber heard her coming. His head lifted weakly from the snow, his dark eyes trying to focus on the shape moving toward him. In his fading awareness, he probably expected his mother. The warmth, the familiar smell, the massive body that had kept him safe every night since his birth. Instead, he saw amber eyes glowing in the darkness, a white face emerging from the white storm. Teeth, fur, something that was not his mother, something that was not anything he had ever seen this close. He should have been terrified. Every fiber of 3 months of moose calf instinct should have screamed at him to scramble to his feet, to run, to flee from the most dangerous predator in his world. But Timber was past fear, past running, past everything except the cold and the desperate need for warmth. He simply watched the white wolf approach with eyes that held no fight left in them, only the quiet resignation of a creature too young and too tired to understand what was happening. Siku closed the distance, 10 feet, 5 feet, 3. She extended her nose and touched the calf's forehead. Timber flinched, a small, exhausted tremor that moved through his entire body. But he did not pull away. He couldn't. Siku inhaled deeply, pulling his scent into her lungs. She held it there for a long moment. Then she exhaled, a warm breath that spread across the calf's frozen muzzle like a whisper. And then she did the impossible. She lay down beside him. Not the way a predator lies beside caught prey, not guarding a kill. She curled her body around the moose calf, the same way she curled around Koda and Mika every night in the den, pressing her warm flank against his trembling side, tucking her tail around his hindquarters, positioning herself so that the wind hit her back instead of his fragile body. She became his shelter. Timber's reaction was immediate. The warmth, real, animal, alive warmth, flooded into his frozen muscles. A sound escaped him. Not the high distress call he had been making for hours. Something quieter. A small, shuddering exhale that carried 6 hours of terror and loneliness out of his body in a single breath. He pressed closer to the wolf. His nose pushed against her thick white fur. His legs, still folded tight, began to relax as the heat from Siku's body seeped into his core. And Siku began to groom him. Her tongue, rough, warm, designed for cleaning wolf pups, moved across the moose calf's face with a gentleness that contradicted everything about what she was. She licked the ice from his muzzle. She cleaned around his eyes. She worked down his neck with the slow, methodical care that wolf mothers give to newborns who need stimulation to keep breathing. Timber closed his eyes. For the first time in 6 hours, he was warm. For the first time since the whiteout had swallowed his world, something was taking care of him. He did not know that this something had teeth designed to tear through moose hide. He did not know that the tongue cleaning his face had tasted moose blood before. He did not care. He was 3 months old, and he was no longer alone, and the creature beside him was warm and gentle and here. That was enough. But this was only the beginning. 40 minutes later, 2 small shapes emerged from the spruce trees at the edge of the clearing, following their mother's scent trail with the determined wobble of pups who had not yet mastered snow travel. Koda arrived first, as he always did, bold, nose forward, entirely unafraid. He stopped short when he saw the scene before him. His mother, lying in the snow, curled around something brown and large, something that did not smell like pack, something that smelled like the animals the adults sometimes chased across the tundra. Koda tilted his head. His small ears went forward. He took 3 careful steps closer and sniffed. Timber's eyes opened at the new scent. He found himself looking directly into the face of a wolf pup, roughly his own age, white fur, dark nose, eyes filled with nothing but curiosity. Koda sniffed Timber's nose. Timber sniffed back. For a long moment, the 2 babies simply regarded each other with the uncomplicated openness that only very young animals possess. Then Koda sneezed, a tiny explosive puff of air that startled both of them, and the tension broke. Mika appeared, behind her brother, more cautious, hanging back at her mother's tail. She watched the strange brown creature with wide, careful eyes, assessing the situation the way she assessed everything, quietly, thoroughly, taking her time. When Siku made no move to push the newcomer away, when she continued grooming him with the same tenderness she showed her own pups, Mika crept closer. Within minutes, the clearing held a scene that defied every predator-prey boundary the natural world had established. A white Arctic wolf lay curled around a moose calf, grooming him with maternal devotion. Two wolf pups had settled on either side of the brown intruder, Coda pressed against Timber's back, Mika tucked near his folded legs. 4 animals, 2 species, one shared warmth against the killing cold. Something impossible had just become real. Ethan found them at dawn. He had tracked Timber's prints through the night, losing them twice when the wind filled them faster than he could follow, finding them again by sweeping wide arcs with his headlamp. By the time the first grey light crept above the Alaska range, he had covered nearly 4 miles on foot through waist-deep snow, and his body was running on nothing but adrenaline and the stubborn refusal to let a baby moose die alone. He almost walked past them. The clearing was small, sheltered by fallen timber and low spruce. The snow had drifted against the windward side, creating a natural wall, and against that wall, nearly invisible in the early light, lay what looked like a single mass of white fur. Ethan raised his binoculars. His hands stopped moving, his breath caught in his throat. He couldn't move, he couldn't breathe. Not with fear, but with the absolute shock of witnessing something his 15 years in this wilderness had never prepared him for. A white Arctic wolf, curled protectively around a moose calf, 2 wolf pups nestled beside them, all 4 animals breathing in the slow, synchronized rhythm of deep, contented sleep. Ethan lowered the binoculars, raised them again. The image didn't change. "That's not possible," he whispered. He recognized the wolf. Every ranger in Denali knew Siku, the white alpha female of the Teklanika pack, one of the most studied wolves in the park. He had watched her hunt moose. He had seen her take down a yearling bull with her pack in a coordinated chase that covered 2 miles of frozen river. She was one of the most effective predators in the ecosystem, and she was cradling a moose calf like it was her own. Ethan's training told him to intervene, to assess the calf's condition, to attempt reunification with the herd, to follow the protocols that existed for exactly this kind of situation. Separated juvenile, compromised health, immediate danger. But the danger wasn't there. That was the thing that kept him frozen behind his binoculars, watching. The calf wasn't in danger. The calf was alive specifically because of this wolf. The warmth of Siku's body had pulled Timber back from hypothermia during the night. Her grooming had stimulated his circulation. Her presence had kept every other predator in the area, the foxes, the ravens, even other wolves, at a distance. She had saved him. A predator had saved her prey. Ethan made a decision that went against every standard protocol in his training manual. He pulled out his radio, switched to the research frequency, and spoke quietly. "This is Mercer at the Teklanika clearing, mile 7 south of the River Fork. I need Dr. Whitman out here. Today. Bring cameras. Bring everything." He paused. "Tell her she's not going to believe what I'm looking at." He settled into a concealed position behind a snow-covered deadfall, pulled his parka tight against the cold, and prepared to watch. Whatever was happening in that clearing, it was not his to interrupt. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As the morning light strengthened and the blizzard finally began to ease, Timber stirred against Siku's warm body. He lifted his head. His dark eyes, clear now, alert in a way they hadn't been since the separation, looked around at his new reality. White fur everywhere, the smell of wolf, the sound of small pups breathing beside him. And something in that baby moose's mind, something simple, something innocent, something that operated on pure feeling rather than logic, reached a conclusion that would define the next months of his life and rewrite the rules of interspecies behavior. These were his family now. This white wolf was his mother. These pups were his siblings, And if they were wolves, then he must be a wolf too. He just had to figure out how to be one. Timber's education in wolfhood began the very first morning. When Siku rose to stretch, front legs extended, back arched, jaws opening in a wide, silent yawn, Koda and Mika mirrored her automatically. It was instinct. Every wolf pup learns by copying its mother before it learns any other way. Timber, watching from his spot in the mild, trampled snow, saw his new family performing this ritual and understood immediately what was expected. He tried to arch his back. Moose spines do not arch. They are built for carrying heavy bodies across rough terrain, for powering through deep snow, for supporting a head that will one day carry antlers weighing 40 pounds. Arching is not in the design. But Timber did not know this. He planted his front legs, tensed every muscle in his back, and pushed upward with everything he had. The result was a 3-month-old moose calf trembling with effort, while his back remained perfectly, stubbornly flat. His long legs splayed slightly. His head dipped toward the ground. His stubby tail twitched. He looked less like a stretching wolf and more like a small brown table experiencing an earthquake. Koda stopped mid-stretch and stared at his new brother. His head tilted to one side, the universal canine expression of complete bewilderment. Timber held the position for 3 more seconds, then gave up and shook his whole body instead, sending a spray of snow in every direction. He seemed satisfied with this alternative. Siku watched the entire performance without reaction. She simply waited until Timber finished, then nuzzled him gently and led the family toward the creek for water. Her patience with this strange, oversized pup would become one of the defining characteristics of the months ahead. A patience so deep and so consistent that Dr. Claire Whitman would later call it the most remarkable example of adaptive mothering ever documented in a wild canid. But Dr. Whitman hadn't arrived yet. That morning, it was only Ethan behind his binoculars, watching a baby moose attempt to become a wolf, unsure whether he was witnessing a miracle or a disaster in slow motion. Dr. Claire Whitman reached the observation site on the 3rd day. She was 48, lean, weathered by 20 years of fieldwork across Alaska and northern Canada, and she had a reputation for being unflappable. She had once spent 9 hours lying motionless in a ground blind while a grizzly bear slept 4 feet from her face. She had documented wolf pack dynamics through 3 consecutive winters without missing a single observation day. She did not rattle easily. But when she pressed her face to the spotting scope that Ethan had set up behind the deadfall and saw what was happening in the clearing below, she lowered the scope, looked at Ethan, and said a single word. "How?" Ethan shook his head. "I've been watching for 3 days. I still don't have an answer." What Dr. Whitman saw through that scope would become the foundation of a research paper that would be cited over 400 times in the first year of publication. But in that moment, it was not science she felt, it was wonder. In the clearing, Timber was attempting to howl. Wolf howling is communication refined over thousands of generations. Pitch, duration, and timing all carry specific information. Pack identity, location, warning, mourning. It is one of the most complex vocal systems in the animal kingdom, and wolf pups begin practicing it within weeks of birth, their small voices joining the chorus with increasing confidence as they grow. Koda had been practicing his howl all morning. For a pup his age, it was impressive, a thin, wavering note that climbed steadily before breaking off. Mika added her own version, higher and shorter, a tentative contribution that she seemed to evaluate critically before trying again. Siku listened to both, with the attentive stillness of a mother assessing her children's progress. Then, Timber decided it was his turn. He had been watching his siblings with intense concentration, his dark eyes tracking the way they lifted their heads, the way their mouths shaped the sound, the way their bodies seemed to channel the howl from somewhere deep inside. He understood the mechanics: head up, mouth open, sound out. He lifted his head. He opened his mouth. And from somewhere inside his moose body came a sound that Dr. Whitman would later describe in her research notes as unprecedented and deeply affecting, though not in any way resembling a wolf vocalization. It was a honk. Not a trumpet, not a bellow, a high, nasal, deeply earnest honk that sounded like a small brass instrument being played underwater. Timber held the note for about 2 seconds, his neck stretched long, his nostrils flaring with effort, producing a sound so far removed from a wolf howl that it seemed to belong to an entirely different planet. Silence followed. Coda and Mika both turned to look at their brother. The clearing was completely still. Then Timber did it again, louder this time, more committed. His whole body leaned into the effort, his front legs bracing as if the sound might knock him backward. The second honk was longer and ended with a slight warble that he seemed particularly proud of. Siku's response was the moment that made Dr. Whitman's breath catch. The white wolf turned to her adopted calf, walked over to him, and pressed her nose against his cheek. The gesture was identical to the one she gave Coda and Mika after their howling practice. A mother's acknowledgement. Encouragement. You did well. Timber leaned into the touch and honked softly one more time, quietly, almost to himself, as if practicing under his breath. She's reinforcing him, Dr. Whitman whispered. She's telling him his voice is acceptable. Ethan said nothing. He was too busy trying to keep his binoculars steady through what he would later admit were the first tears he had shed in the field in 15 years. The howling practice became a daily ritual. Every morning, as the pale winter light crept across the Denali sky, the family would gather, and Siku would begin the session with a long, resonant howl that echoed off the mountains and carried across the frozen landscape. Coda and Mika would join in, their voices strengthening day by day. And Timber would add his contribution, that unmistakable honk rising above the wolf chorus like a trombone accidentally seated in a string quartet. But what no one expected was how the family adapted. Over the following days, Dr. Whitman documented something that challenged established understanding of wolf vocal behavior. Coda began modifying his howl, subtly at first, a slight shift in pitch, a different rhythm to his breathing. Within a week, his howling sessions occasionally included a short, nasal note tucked between his normal wolf vocalizations. It wasn't a honk exactly, but it wasn't a standard wolf sound either. He was meeting his brother halfway. Mika adapted differently. She began timing her howls to overlap with Timber's, creating a layered sound that masked the moose calf's unusual contribution and wove it into the family's chorus. Whether this was intentional or instinctive, Dr. Whitman couldn't determine, but the effect was unmistakable. The family was creating a new sound together, part wolf, part moose, entirely their own. They're building a shared language, Dr. Whitman said into her recorder one evening, her voice carrying the barely controlled excitement of a scientist watching her field rewrite itself in real time. This isn't simply tolerance. The pack is actively integrating Timber's vocalizations into their communication structure. I have no framework for this. Have you ever watched someone try so hard to belong that it broke your heart and made you smile at the same time? That was Timber. Every single day. The hunting lessons were where comedy and devotion collided most spectacularly. Wolf pups begin developing hunting instincts early. Stalking, pouncing, chasing. These behaviors emerge in play long before they are applied to actual prey. By the time Coda and Mika were practicing their skills on voles and snowshoe hares, they had already internalized the fundamentals. Low body, silent approach, explosive pounce. Timber watched, Timber studied, Timber tried. His first stalking attempt targeted a ptarmigan that had landed in the clearing, its white winter plumage making it nearly invisible against the snow. Coda demonstrated the approach, body pressed low, paws placed with surgical precision, moving forward in increments so small that the bird never registered the threat. Timber lowered himself into his version of a stalking crouch. Moose calves are not built for crouching. Their legs are long, their bodies are tall, their center of gravity is high. Timber's attempt to get low resulted in a posture that looked like a brown sawhorse that had lost confidence in its pace. Structural integrity. Legs bent at strange angles, belly barely closer to the ground than when he was standing, neck stretched forward in what he apparently believed was a predatory position. He began his approach. Each step was enormous, exaggerated. His long legs lifted high and came down with a soft but unmistakable crunch in the snow. He swung his head from side to side with each step, apparently convinced this added stealth to the operation. The ptarmigan watched him come with what could only be described as casual disbelief. At 15 feet, the bird still hadn't moved, possibly frozen in confusion rather than fear. At 10 feet, Timber paused, gathered himself, and launched his attack. A moose calf pounce is not a wolf pounce. A wolf pounce is compact, explosive, precise. Timber's pounce involved all 4 legs leaving the ground simultaneously, his body traveling more upward than forward, and landing with a thud that Dr. Whitman later estimated was audible from 200 yards away. The ptarmigan had departed approximately 1 full second before impact. Timber stood in the crater his landing had created, looking around with an expression of genuine confusion about where his prey had gone. He tried again 14 times that week. 14 targets. 14 elaborate, deeply committed stalking sequences. 14 spectacular pounces. 0 catches. His success rate did not trouble him in the slightest. After each attempt, he would trot back to Siku with the satisfied air of an athlete completing a training drill, and she would greet him with the same gentle nose touch she gave Koda and Mika after their far more successful efforts. But the moment that became Dr. Whitman's favorite, the footage she showed at every conference for the next 5 years, happened on the 9th day. Koda had cornered a vole near the creek bank. He was executing a perfect hunting sequence, body low, perfectly still, waiting for the precise moment to strike. Mika had positioned herself to cut off the vole's escape route, demonstrating the pack coordination that wolves develop from an early age. Timber wanted to help. He approached from behind Koda with what he clearly believed was stealth. His legs moved in exaggerated slow motion. His head was low, or as low as a moose calf's head gets. His breathing was loud enough to fog the air in visible puffs with each step. When he was directly behind Koda, he stopped, waited, gathered himself, and then he announced his presence with a sharp, triumphant honk, apparently believing that the hunting protocol required a battle cry before the final strike. The vole vanished instantly. Koda's head whipped around with an expression that, if translated from wolf to human, would have been something close to exasperation. Mika sat down in the snow and seemed to give up entirely. Timber stood tall in the aftermath, breathing hard, looking enormously pleased with his contribution to the family hunt. Siku, watching from 10 yards away, made no corrective gesture, no growl of disapproval. She simply waited for her children to regroup, then led them toward the creek where the afternoon light was catching the ice in ways that always attracted small prey. And the hunting lessons continued. But beneath the comedy, something profound was happening. Dr. Whitman documented it carefully. Timber was not simply imitating wolf behaviors as an isolated exercise. He was integrating into the family's social structure in ways that required genuine emotional intelligence from every member of the group. Siku had begun adjusting the family's daily patterns to accommodate Timber's needs. Wolves are primarily carnivorous. Moose calves require browse, willow buds, birch twigs, the inner bark of young trees. Siku had started leading the family to areas where both prey for hunting practice and vegetation for timber existed in proximity. She would watch as Timber used his mouth to strip willow bark, while Koda and Mika practiced stalking nearby. All 3 of her children fed and occupied simultaneously. She was mothering across species lines, learning as she went, making decisions that had no template in wolf behavior. And Koda and Mika were learning something equally remarkable. They were learning that family didn't require sameness. Their brother looked different, sounded different, moved differently, failed at every wolf skill they excelled at, and none of that mattered. When the temperature dropped at night and the wind screamed across the tundra, the 3 of them pressed together, with Siku in their sheltered spot beneath the spruce. Timber in the middle, always in the middle, his larger body generating warmth that the wolf pups nestled into gratefully. His long legs stretched out, while Coda curled against his chest and Mika tucked herself behind his back. They fit together the way family fits together. Not perfectly, not symmetrically, but completely. Weeks passed. Timber grew. That was the thing about moose calves. They grew fast. By the end of his second month with the pack, Timber was already larger than Siku. His legs had stretched into the long, angular limbs that would one day carry a 1,000-pound body through chest-deep snow. His face had begun losing its rounded baby softness, lengthening into the distinctive moose profile. A shadow of velvet had appeared on his head where antlers would eventually emerge. He was becoming something that looked nothing like a wolf, and he had absolutely no idea. Every morning, same routine. Siku stretched. Coda and Mika stretched. Timber performed his signature move. Legs splayed, body rigid, a full body shake that sent snow flying in a 3-foot radius. He had abandoned the arching attempt weeks ago and replaced it with something entirely his own. The shake had become his stretch, his declaration that the day had begun. Siku accepted it without question, as far as she was concerned. This was simply how Timber woke up. The games evolved as the weeks progressed. Coda and Mika had discovered early the traditional wolf play, the chasing, pinning and wrestling that developed hunting coordination, needed modification when your brother outweighed you by 40 pounds and had legs like stilts. So they invented new ones. The favorite was a game Dr. Whitman named Snowplow. Timber would lower his head and charge through fresh snow, carving a deep trench with his chest. Coda and Mika would race along the trench behind him, using the cleared path to reach speeds they could never achieve in deep powder. When Timber stopped, the pups would shoot past him, tumbling over each other in the packed snow. Then they would circle back, yipping with excitement, and Timber would lower his head and charge again. It was cooperation disguised as chaos, each animal contributing what their body was built for. Timber had mass and power. Coda and Mika had speed and agility. Together, they had invented something that belonged to no species, only to them. The tree game was another innovation. Timber had discovered that his height allowed him to reach branches that the wolves could only stare at from the ground. He would stretch his neck, grab a branch thick with lichen, and pull it down to where Coda and Mika could reach it. The pups would grab the end and pull back, creating an interspecies tug-of-war that could last 10 minutes. Timber anchoring with his weight, while 2 wolf pups threw themselves sideways, trying to tear the branch free. Siku watched these games from nearby, always positioned where she could see all 3 of her children. Her amber eyes tracked every interaction with the constant, quiet vigilance of a mother who understood that her family was unusual and that the world around them might not always be kind to unusual things. But not everything was play. Feeding remained the most complex challenge of this impossible arrangement. Siku needed meat. Coda and Mika were beginning to transition from milk to solid food, needing the protein and fat that only fresh kills could provide. Timber needed vegetation, willow, birch bark, aquatic plants when they could be found beneath thin ice at the creek's edge. Siku had solved this with a daily rhythm that Dr. Whitman found extraordinary. Mornings were spent in the willow flats along the creek, where Timber could browse, while the pups practiced hunting voles in the adjacent meadow. Afternoons, when the pack's adult members occasionally brought food back to the den site, Siku would position Timber slightly apart, close enough to remain within the family circle, far enough that the presence of raw meat didn't create confusion. It was problem-solving that required a kind of intelligence beyond instinct. Siku was thinking, planning, adapting her behavior daily based on what worked and what didn't. She's essentially running 2 feeding programs simultaneously, Dr. Whitman noted in her field journal. One for carnivores, one for a herbivore. No wolf has ever needed to do this. She's inventing it from nothing. The other pack members presented their own challenge. 7 wolves total in the Teklenika pack, and not all of them shared Siku's tolerance for the brown intruder. Siku's mate, a large grey male the researchers had named Boone, had initially reacted to Timber with visible confusion. He had circled the moose calf at a distance for the first 3 days, his body language cycling between predatory interest and deference to his mate's obvious protectiveness. Siku had settled the matter on the 4th day. When Boone approached Timber too closely, she placed herself between them and delivered a snarl so sharp and clear that every wolf in the area stopped moving. The message was simple. This is mine. Back off. Boone backed off. He never challenged the arrangement again. And over time, something shifted in his behavior too. He began ignoring Timber completely, treating the moose calf as a fixed element of the landscape, unusual, inexplicable, but not worth contesting. The other pack members followed his lead. Timber existed in a category the wolves had no framework for. Not pack, not prey, something else entirely, protected by the one wolf whose authority no one questioned. And then, everything changed. It came through the radio on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after Timber's adoption. Ethan was in the observation blind, adjusting the camera that Dr. Whitman's team had mounted on a nearby spruce when the call came through. Mercer, this is Station 4. The sanctuary moose herd has been located. Aerial spotted them moving south along the Teklanika drainage. 14 head confirmed. They're heading back toward traditional winter range. Ethan's hand tightened around the radio. South along the Teklanika drainage. That put them on a direct path toward the territory where Timber was living with the wolves. "Copy," he said. "How far out?" 12, maybe 15 miles. Moving slow. Deep snows slowing them down. Could be here in a week, maybe 10 days. Ethan lowered the radio and looked through the scope at the clearing below. Timber was engaged in a vigorous round of snowplow, his head down, legs churning, carving a trench through fresh powder, while Coda surfed the wake behind him with his mouth open in what looked unmistakably like joy. A week, maybe 10 days. He found Dr. Whitman at the research tent and told her. She listened without expression, then sat down on the equipment case and was quiet for a long time. "His mother is with the herd?" she finally asked. "Birch, yes, confirmed." More silence. "He's thriving here," Dr. Whitman said. "His weight gain is on track. His social development is remarkable. His stress indicators are virtually non-existent." She paused. "But he's a moose." That sentence hung between them in the cold air, carrying the weight of everything it implied. Timber was thriving now, but he was 3 months old, growing at a rate that would soon make his position within a wolf pack physically untenable. Within a year, he would be 500 pounds. Within 2 years, close to 1,000. The wolf family that had saved his life and given him identity would become something he literally could not fit inside. And there were skills he wasn't learning. Moose survival depended on knowledge passed from mother to calf, which plants were safe, which frozen rivers could bear weight, how to use those powerful legs to break through ice to reach water. Siku could not teach him these things. Love could not replace them. "We don't intervene yet," Dr. Whitman said finally. "We watch. If the herd passes close enough, we see how Timber reacts. His instincts may make the decision for us." Ethan nodded. But the weight of what was coming had already settled into his chest. He had watched this family form from nothing. He had seen Siku choose the impossible and make it work through pure devotion. He had watched Timber become the happiest, most confident baby moose in Alaska, precisely because he didn't know he was a moose. And now the world was about to remind him. Back in the clearing, Timber had finished his snowplow run and was standing still, his head raised, ears turning slowly. Something in the wind, something distant. He held the posture for 5 seconds, 10. His dark eyes focused on the northern horizon. Then Coda bumped his leg from behind, wanting another run, and the moment broke. Timber lowered his head, shook off whatever had caught his attention, and charged back into the snow. But the most shocking part hadn't happened yet. Because what was coming wouldn't just test one bond. It would test every single one. And not everyone would survive it unchanged. The call started reaching Timber 3 days before the herd arrived. Low, resonant sounds that traveled through the frozen air in ways that wolf howls never did. Deeper, slower, vibrating at a frequency that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and settle somewhere in his chest. Moose communicate across vast distances using infrasonic rumbles that other species can barely detect. But Timber detected them. His body knew these sounds, even if his mind had forgotten them. The first time it happened, he was playing with Coda near the creek. Mid-stride, he stopped, completely still. His ears rotated forward, his nostrils flared wide, pulling air in long, searching draws. Coda circled back, nipping at Timber's leg to restart the game. Timber didn't respond. He stood frozen for nearly a minute, facing north, his entire body oriented towards something invisible. Then he shook it off and returned to play. But something had cracked open. A door that had been sealed shut for 2 months by warmth and belonging and the daily rhythm of wolf family life. It happened. Again the next morning. And the morning after that. Each time the pause lasted longer. Each time Timber's attention was harder to pull back. Dr. Whitman recorded every instance. Timestamp, duration, direction of orientation, behavioral response afterward. The data told a clear story. Timber's biological instincts were waking up, responding to signals from his own species that no amount of wolf bonding could override. He's hearing his herd, she told Ethan on the 4th evening. The infrasonic calls. He may not understand what he's hearing, but his body does. Siku knew before anyone else. She had always known in the way that mothers know things, not through analysis, but through the constant, wordless monitoring of everything her children did. She had watched Timber's pauses. She had seen the way his attention drifted north with increasing frequency. She had felt the subtle shift in his body when he lay beside her at night, a restlessness that hadn't been there before, a tension in muscles that used to go completely soft against her warmth. Her response was not what the researchers expected. She didn't increase her protectiveness. She didn't try to keep Timber closer or restrict his movement. Instead, she did something that Dr. Whitman would spend years trying to fully understand. She began leading the family north, slowly, a 1/4 mile one day, 1/2 mile the next, adjusting their territory in small increments that moved them closer to the approaching herd, as if she were building a bridge between Timber's 2 worlds instead of a wall around the one she had created. She's facilitating it, Dr. Whitman whispered, watching through the scope as Siku led her 3 children across a frozen meadow, heading north for the 3rd consecutive day. She's not fighting it, she's helping. Ethan didn't trust himself to speak. The last full day was the hardest to watch. Timber woke that morning and did not do his shake. He stood up slowly, stepped away from the sleeping pile of wolf bodies, and walked to the edge of the clearing. He stood there for a long time, his head raised, his ears working, the northern wind carrying sounds that only he could fully hear. When he came back, he lay down next to Siku and pressed his face against her neck. He stayed there, breathing against her white fur, for 10 minutes without moving. Siku did not sleep through this. Her amber eyes were open. Her breathing was steady but deliberate. She knew. What would you do if you could feel someone you loved preparing to leave? Not because they stopped loving you, but because something older and deeper was calling them home. Coda sensed the change too, though he couldn't have understood it. He spent that day closer to Timber than usual, initiating games with unusual persistence, bumping his brother's legs, tugging at the fur on his chest. Each invitation was accepted, each game played with a tenderness that hadn't been there in previous weeks, as if Timber was paying closer attention to every moment, memorizing it. Mika, quiet as always, simply stayed near. She positioned herself wherever Timber was, beside him at the creek, behind him during walks, pressed against his flank during rest. Not playing, just present. As if her closeness alone could hold something together that was starting to come apart. That afternoon, Dr. Whitman received radio confirmation. The sanctuary herd was less than 3 miles north. They had stopped to browse in a willow flat along the upper Teklanika. Birch had been observed at the edge of the group, repeatedly lifting her head and calling, a behavior the aerial observers noted she had been displaying for days. A mother still searching, still calling. 2 months later, still refusing to stop. "Tomorrow," Dr. Whitman said quietly. Ethan nodded. His jaw was tight. The last night was still. The wind had died for the first time in weeks. The sky had cleared to reveal a spread of stars, so dense it looked like the darkness itself was made of light. And threading through the stars, the aurora borealis, green and violet curtains rippling silently across the sky, turning the snow into a shifting canvas of color. Beneath a spruce tree at the edge of a frozen meadow, the impossible family lay together for the last time. Siku in the center, Koda curled against her chest, Mika tucked behind her back, and Timber, too big now to fit neatly, his legs folding at awkward angles, his body taking up more space than the 3 wolves combined, pressed as close to Siku as physics allowed. No one slept deeply that night. Dr. Whitman, watching from the blind through a night vision scope, documented what she described as sustained physical contact, exceeding any previously recorded observation period. They did not shift apart and resettle the way they normally did. They stayed pressed together, breathing together, holding formation as if movement might break something that couldn't be repaired. At one point during the night, Timber raised his head and released a sound. Not a honk, not his practiced wolf howl attempt. Something between the two, a low, sustained note that carried elements of both species in its tone. It drifted across the meadow and faded into the silent aurora. Siku lifted her head and howled back, long, low. The sound threaded through the colored sky and disappeared into the stars. Koda and Mika added their voices, small, thin, but present. And for one moment, under the northern lights, the family spoke together for the last time in the language they had built from nothing, the language that belonged to no species, no textbook, no category that science had yet created. Just theirs. Dr. Whitman stopped writing in her field journal. She set the pen down and simply watched, letting herself be a witness rather than a scientist. Some things should not be measured, only felt. And the real story was only just beginning, because dawn would bring the sound of moose calls from just beyond the tree line, and Timber would have to choose between the family that saved him and the family that made him. And the answer, the beautiful, devastating answer, would break and rebuild every heart that witnessed it. Dawn came slowly. The sky turned from black to deep blue, to a pale, cold grey that spread across the Denali horizon like something holding its breath. Timber was already standing. He had risen before Siku, before Koda and Mika, before the first light touched the spruce tops. He stood at the northern edge of the clearing facing the tree line, his body completely still. Ears forward, nostrils wide, every muscle locked in the posture of an animal listening to something that mattered more than anything had ever mattered before. The moose calls were close now. Not distant rumbles carried on the wind. Close, clear, individual voices distinguishable from each other, the deep resonance of the matriarch, the lighter calls of younger cows, and one voice that rose above the rest with a frequency and urgency that nothing in the natural world could fake. A mother calling for her calf. Birch. Timber's body began to tremble, not from cold. The trembling started in his legs and moved upward through his flanks, his shoulders, his neck. His mouth opened slightly. His breath came in short, visible clouds. Something was happening inside him that went beyond instinct, beyond memory, beyond anything that had a name. His body was recognizing something his mind had buried for 2 months beneath wolf fur and wolf love and the daily business of being someone else's child. He knew that voice. Behind him, Siku rose, quietly. She did not stretch, she did not shake. She stood, and looked at Timber's back, at the trembling, at the raised head, at the orientation towards something that was coming to take him away, and she was still. Perfectly, completely still. Coda stirred next, blinking awake, yawning. He looked around for Timber and found him standing apart. Something in the pup's body language shifted, a tightening, a confusion. He trotted toward his brother and bumped his leg, the usual invitation. Timber didn't look down. Coda bumped again, harder. A small whine escaped his throat. Nothing. Mika appeared beside her mother. She pressed against Siku's leg and watched. The herd emerged from the tree line at 7:42 a.m. Dr. Whitman noted the exact time because her hands were shaking too badly to write anything else. Sage came first. The old matriarch moved through the snow with the careful authority of an animal who had crossed this land for 15 years. Behind her, the herd followed in single file. Cows, yearlings, the whole sanctuary group threading through the spruce in a line that curved across the meadow like a dark brushstroke on white canvas. But it was the cow at the rear of the line that mattered. Birch broke formation before she reached the meadow. Something had hit her. Scent, sound, the invisible signal that mothers receive from the universe when their child is near. She stopped mid-stride. Her head came up so fast that the cow behind her startled sideways. Then Birch was moving, not walking, running. A full, chest-deep charge through the snow toward the clearing where a baby moose stood trembling beside a family of wolves. The sound she made carried across the entire valley, a call so raw, so loaded with 2 months of searching and grief and desperate hope, that Dr. Whitman would later say it was the most emotional vocalization she had recorded in 20 years of fieldwork. Timber heard it. His whole body jolted as if struck. His head swung toward the charging cow, and something in his eyes, something deeper than thought, caught fire. Recognition. The kind that doesn't live in the brain but in the blood, in the marrow, in the architecture of every cell. He knew her. He took one step forward, then another. Then he was running too. A 3-month-old moose calf running toward his mother across a frozen meadow in Alaska, legs churning, body lurching, no grace, no coordination, just pure, desperate need covering the distance between lost and found. They met in the middle of the meadow. Birch reached him first. Her trunk, her long head, dropped immediately to his body, sniffing, touching, running her muzzle across every inch of him with the frantic thoroughness of a mother, confirming that what she was seeing was real. She made sounds that the research team had never recorded from a moose. Low, continuous, broken notes that rose and fell like someone trying to speak through tears. Timber pressed into her, his face buried against her neck. His legs buckled slightly, then held. He was shaking. She was shaking. The snow around them was churned into chaos by their circling, their touching, their inability to stop moving toward each other, even though they were already as close as two bodies could be. The reunion lasted 4 minutes. Dr. Whitman timed it. 4 minutes of two animals pressed together in the snow, making sounds that needed no translation, relearning the shape of each other after 63 days apart. No one at the observation blind spoke. No one moved. Ethan had his binoculars pressed to his face, and his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Dr. Whitman had stopped writing entirely. Her pen lay in the snow where she had dropped it. And then Timber turned around. That was the moment. That was the image that would appear in every documentary, every article, every research paper that told this story for the next decade. A baby moose, standing between his birth mother and his wolf family, looking back. Siku had not moved from the clearing's edge. She stood exactly where she had been when Timber first walked away from her. White fur against white snow, amber eyes steady. Coda pressed against her right leg, Mika against her left, 3 wolves watching a moose calf rediscover where he came from. Timber looked at Birch, then at Siku, then at Birch again. He took a step toward the herd, stopped, turned back toward the wolves. He couldn't move, couldn't choose. His body swayed between 2 directions like a compass needle caught between 2 magnetic poles, and in his dark eyes was a confusion so deep and so honest that it hurt to witness. This was not an animal making a strategic decision. This was a child standing between two mothers, loving both, understanding that moving toward one meant moving away from the other. The silence in that meadow was absolute. Even the wind had stopped. Even the ravens circling above had gone quiet, as if the entire wilderness understood that this moment demanded stillness. Timber walked back to Siku, slowly, each step deliberate. He crossed the meadow with his head low, and when he reached her, he did something he had never done before. He extended his neck and pressed his forehead against hers. Moose to wolf, nose to nose, breathing the same air. Siku closed her eyes. The contact lasted 8 seconds. Dr. Whitman counted. 8 seconds of two species touching foreheads in a frozen meadow while the world held its breath. Then Timber moved to Coda. He lowered his head and bumped the pup gently. Their greeting, their game starter, their way of saying, "I see you." Coda bumped back. His tail wagged once, then tucked low. Mika was last. Timber stood over her for a moment, and she looked up at him with those quiet, watchful eyes that had observed everything and understood more than anyone gave her credit for. Timber touched his nose to the top of her head. She leaned into it. Then he pulled away. He turned, walked back across the meadow, reached Birch, who was waiting with the patience of a mother who would wait forever if necessary. He positioned himself beside her, the place where a moose calf belongs, tucked against his mother's flank, sheltered by her body. He was choosing to go home, but he wasn't finished. Standing beside Birch, Timber raised his head and released a sound. Not a honk, not a howl. The sound he had created on that last night under the aurora, the one that belonged to no species, the one that was his alone. It rolled across the meadow, low and sustained, carrying something that every creature present seemed to understand. "Thank you. I love you. I will remember." Siku answered. One howl, long, clean. It rose into the grey morning sky and hung there like a held breath before fading. Coda's small voice joined. Then Mika's. The wolves howled for their brother. The sound filled the valley and echoed off the mountains and carried across the frozen wilderness until it became part of the landscape itself, part of the snow, part of the ice, part of the story that this land would hold forever. Birch began walking north. Timber walked beside her. His steps were steady, his head was high. He did not look back again. He didn't need to. Everything he was taking with him, the courage, the confidence, the knowledge that he was worthy of being loved by creatures who had no reason to love him, was already inside him. Siku had put it there. Coda and Mika had put it there. Every morning howl, every failed hunt, every night, pressed together under the stars, had built something in this moose calf that would never leave him. The herd absorbed him as he approached. Sage, the old matriarch, extended her nose and touched him in greeting. Younger cows circled close, sniffing this returned member with curiosity and welcome. Within minutes, Timber was surrounded by his own kind. Tall, dark, long-legged animals who looked like him, smelled like him, moved like him. He fit here. He had always fit here. But he fit somewhere else too. And carrying both of those truths was going to be the work of his lifetime. Siku watched until the herd disappeared into the tree line. She did not follow. She did not call again. She stood at the edge of the meadow with her two remaining pups pressed against her legs, her amber eyes tracking the last dark shape until it merged with the spruce shadows and was gone. Then she turned, led Coda and Mika back toward the den, and the clearing was empty. Ethan lowered his binoculars. His face was wet. He didn't wipe it. Dr. Whitman picked her pen up from the snow. She opened her field journal to a blank page and stared at it for a long time. Then she wrote a single sentence. "Love is not a species. It is a decision." She closed the journal. The weeks after the separation were quiet. Siku led her pack back to the core of their territory along the Teklanika drainage. She hunted, She fed her pups. She patrolled the boundaries with the same disciplined rhythm she had maintained before a baby moose had rewritten the rules of her world. From the outside, nothing looked different. But Ethan noticed, and Dr. Whitman documented. Siku had changed. The fierceness was still there, the sharp intelligence, the authority that held her pack together. But something had softened in the spaces between. She was more patient with the younger wolves, more tolerant when Koda pushed boundaries or Mika wandered further than usual. She had always been a devoted mother. Now she was something more. A mother who had proven to herself that love did not require logic, and who carried that proof in every decision she made. Koda and Mika grew fast. By spring, Koda had nearly doubled in size, his white fur thickening into the powerful coat of a young male, finding his place in the pack hierarchy. He was bold, confident, quick to act, traits that had defined him from birth. But he also displayed a quality that the researchers had never seen in a wolf his age: a willingness to approach unfamiliar animals without immediate aggression, a curiosity that overrode the default suspicion most wolves showed toward anything outside their species. Dr. Whitman attributed it directly to timber. Koda had spent his formative weeks with a brother who looked nothing like him, and it had wired something different into his understanding of the world. Mika's changes were subtler. She remained the quiet one, the observer, the wolf who watched everything twice before acting once. But her observations had a depth that other wolves lacked. She could read body language across species lines, a skill that would make her an exceptional hunter in the years ahead, able to anticipate prey movements with an accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. Both of them carried their brother with them. Not in memory the way humans carry memory, in story and image and conscious recall. In something deeper, in the shape of who they had become because of who they had loved. Timber's integration with the sanctuary herd went faster than anyone predicted. Within days of his return, Birch had resumed the maternal education that the blizzard had interrupted. She led him to feeding sites, taught him which willows held the most nutrition, showed him how to use his growing legs to break through crusted snow to reach buried vegetation. The survival curriculum that every moose calf needs, delivered with the patient repetition of a mother making up for lost time. Timber absorbed it all. His confidence, the unshakable, almost reckless confidence that Siku's love had built in him, made him a fast learner. Where other calves hesitated, Timber pushed forward. Where they startled at unfamiliar sounds, Timber investigated. He approached the world with the certainty of an animal who had been loved fiercely by a predator and survived. And that certainty made him braver than any calf the researchers had ever observed. But he retained things, wolf things, habits that had no place in a moose herd, but that he carried like souvenirs from another life. He still did the shake every morning, front legs planted, full body tremor, snow flying in every direction. The other calves in the herd watched this performance with blank confusion. Timber didn't care. He still raised his head at dawn and released his sound, that low note caught between honk and howl. It didn't carry the way it had in the clearing with Siku and the pups. Out here, surrounded by moose, it was a solo performance without an audience that understood it. But he did it anyway, every morning, without fail. And sometimes, when the wind came from the south carrying the faintest trace of something familiar, Timber would stop whatever he was doing and stand perfectly still, ears forward, nostrils wide, the same posture he had held on those last days before the reunion, listening for wolves. The first seasonal reunion happened in late March. The sanctuary herd's spring migration route crossed the southern edge of Teklanika Pack territory. Dr. Whitman had predicted the overlap and positioned her team accordingly, but she had not predicted what she would witness. Timber sensed the wolves before anyone else. He separated from the herd, not far, just 50 yards, and stood facing west. Within minutes, 3 white shapes emerged from the tree line: Siku, Koda, Mika. They stopped at 80 yards. Timber stopped at 50. The distance between them held for nearly a minute, a cautious, respectful gap maintained by animals who understood that things had changed, but that something beneath the change had not. Coda broke first. He trotted forward with the same bold, nose-first confidence he had shown as a pup. Timber lowered his head. They touched noses. The greeting lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds of contact between a young wolf and a young moose who had once slept curled together in the snow. Then Coda circled back to his mother, and Mika stepped forward for her own moment, briefer, quieter, a touch so light it barely happened. But it happened. Siku did not approach. She stood at the tree line and watched. Her amber eyes found Timber's dark ones across the distance, and they held. No movement, no sound, just two mothers' children recognizing each other across the space that life had placed between them. Timber raised his head and made his sound. Siku answered with a single short howl. Then the wolves turned and disappeared into the spruce. The moose herd continued north, and the meadow was empty again, except for the tracks. Wolf and moose, overlapping briefly in the snow before diverging in different directions. Dr. Whitman recorded 3 more reunions over the following 2 years. Each followed the same pattern. Brief, gentle, wordless. A ritual maintained by animals who had no obligation to maintain it, driven by nothing except the memory of warmth shared during the coldest season of their lives. Years passed. Timber grew into a magnificent bull, over 1,000 pounds, antlers spanning 4 feet, one of the largest moose in the Denali population. He moved through the Alaska wilderness with a quiet authority that other bulls respected, and that researchers recognized as unusual. He was not aggressive without cause. He was not fearful without reason. He occupied his space in the ecosystem with the balanced confidence of an animal who understood, on some cellular level, that he had been loved by both prey and predator, and had survived both experiences intact. Siku continued leading the Teklenika pack for 3 more years before age and injury gradually shifted her role. Coda eventually dispersed to form his own pack, a pack that researchers noted showed unusually low aggression toward non-prey species. Mika remained with her mother, becoming the pack's most effective hunter, her ability to read animal behavior across species lines giving her an edge that other wolves simply did not possess. The research that Dr. Whitman published changed the conversation around interspecies bonding in wild animals. 400 citations in the first year, invitations to conferences on 6 continents, a documentary that was viewed 40 million times. But when journalists asked her what the most important finding was, she never cited data. She quoted her own field journal. One sentence, written in the snow on the morning a baby moose chose to go home. Love is not a species, it is a decision. And sometimes, if you visit Denali in late winter, when the snow is deep and the aurora paints the sky, and the silence between the mountains feels like something alive, you might see something that doesn't fit any category. A bull moose standing at the edge of a meadow, still, head raised, facing south. And from the tree line, a howl, thin, distant, but answered. Not with a trumpet, not with a bellow, with a sound that belongs to no field guide, a sound that a baby moose invented in a wolf's den during the worst blizzard in 20 years because he wanted his family to know that he was trying, that he belonged, that he loved them in the only language he could build from the pieces of 2 worlds. Some bonds don't fade. They just change shape. And in the wild heart of Alaska, where the cold can kill and the darkness lasts for months and survival demands everything an animal has, even there, especially there, love finds a way to outlast it all. This story teaches us that family is not defined by blood or species or the shape of the body you were born into. It is defined by who shows up when the storm hits. Who lies down beside you when the cold is too much to bear alone? Who lets you honk when everyone else howls and loves you anyway? Siku did not save Timber because it made sense. She saved him because something in her heart recognized something in his, a need that matched her own, a wound that could only be healed by choosing to love again when love had already cost her everything. And Timber did not have to stop being a wolf to become a moose again. He carried both: the courage of the pack, the wisdom of the herd, the impossible, beautiful truth that you can belong to more than one world, more than one family, more than one definition of home. If this story made you feel something real, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Do you believe that animals can love the way we do? Not because they have to, but because they choose to.